A towering pole, draped in ribbons, stands at the heart of a boisterous village celebration. Laughter rings out as dancers weave colorful patterns, their feet pounding the earth in a rhythm older than memory. But this was far more than simple fun. For medieval communities, the maypole was a vital anchor of their entire world. By the end of this journey, you will understand the incredible secret meanings woven into its very wood, revealing how a single tree could hold a village's fate. We will uncover why the church fought so hard to ban it, and what ancient magic villagers believed they were dancing into existence. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you see a maypole? Rising high above the rooftops, the maypole was a spectacle of communal effort. It was not a small, decorative garden feature, but a massive, central pillar, often a single, straight tree trunk stripped of its branches and towed into the village by teams of men. Its great height meant it could be seen from every corner of the community, a silent giant presiding over the square. On the day of the celebration, this wooden giant would be transformed. Villagers would adorn it with long, flowing ribbons in vibrant greens, reds, and whites, weaving in garlands of fresh wildflowers and even hanging circular wreaths from its top. This was the heart of the village, physically and spiritually, but to see it as mere decoration is to miss its true power. The maypole was the community's identity made visible. Its raising was a collective act that required every able body, and its decorations were a tapestry woven from the labor and artistry of the entire village, from the children gathering blossoms to the elders tying the final knots. This singular object marked the turning of the seasons, a fixed point in the cyclical rhythm of planting and harvest that governed every aspect of medieval life. It stood as a promise of renewal, a declaration that the barren winter was over and the time for growth and community had returned. To truly understand its power, we must journey back to a time before the church spires dominated the landscape, into the deep, sacred woods of our ancestors. Long before it was a village centerpiece, the maypole was a living tree, revered by Germanic and Celtic tribes as a cosmic pillar. They saw the world as alive with spirit, and the tallest, straightest trees were considered sacred connectors, their roots delving into the underworld and their branches reaching for the heavens. This was the axis of the world, a channel for the life force that flowed between earth and sky. The very act of cutting such a tree and bringing it into the village was not destruction, but a transfer of that raw, wild power into the heart of the community. Can you feel the significance of that? They were not just moving wood, they were relocating a god. These rites were tied to potent festivals of fire and fertility, like the Celtic celebration of Beltane, which marked the beginning of summer. On Beltane, great bonfires were lit, and cattle were driven between them for purification and protection. The world was awakening, and the people sought to harness that explosive energy for the growth of their crops and the health of their families. In Roman tradition, this time was dedicated to Flora, the goddess of flowers and spring, a period of unrestrained revelry and blooming life. The maypole, then, is a direct descendant of these ancient beliefs. It is a symbolic tree of life, brought from the wild forest to the ordered field, charged with one vital purpose: to ensure fertility for the land, the livestock, and the people themselves. The dancing ribbons we see today are the echoes of older, more potent rituals, where the community's very survival was thought to depend on this sacred connection. So what happened when a new religion with one god arrived in these pagan lands? The clash that followed would threaten to tear the maypole down for good. This sacred pillar was far more than a local landmark. It was a cosmic engine. Across the ancient world, from the Norse with their great ash tree, Yggdrasil, to the Siberian shamans who climbed a symbolic birch to reach the spirits, people shared a profound vision of a world tree. This was the axis mundi, the still point of the turning universe, a spiritual axis connecting all layers of existence. Its roots plunged deep into the dark, fertile underworld. Its trunk stood firm in our middle world of human struggle and seasons, and its highest branches cradled the celestial realms of the gods and ancestors. The maypole was this concept made real for the medieval villager. By raising it in their midst, they were not just celebrating spring, they were anchoring their entire community to the cosmos itself. They were bringing cosmic order to their fields and homes. Think of the sheer reassurance in that act. In a world governed by unpredictable weather, blight, and famine, the Maypoles stood as a fixed point of stability. It was a declaration that their small village was not an isolated speck, but a vital part of a grand, interconnected whole. The dance around it was a human-scale reenactment of the planets circling the sun, the ribbons weaving a pattern that mirrored the very order of the heavens. This was how they wove their humble lives into the tapestry of the stars, ensuring that the cosmic forces of growth and life would flow directly into their soil. Such a potent symbol of the old world could not be ignored by the new. As Christianity spread across Europe, its clergy looked upon the boisterous Maypole dances with deep suspicion. To them, this was not a harmless celebration, but a dangerous remnant of pagan idolatry, a direct challenge to the one true God. The church launched a two-pronged attack, first trying to eradicate the tradition entirely. In the 7th century, St. Eligius famously thundered against those who celebrated with trees and poles, calling it a devilish practice. Later, Puritan authorities in England took this condemnation to its logical extreme. After the English Civil War, they enacted a complete ban, viewing the maypole as a heathenish idol that promoted lewd behavior and distracted from proper worship. In one notorious case, the Puritan soldiers who captured the town of Marymount in the American colonies immediately chopped down the giant maypole the settlers had erected, seeing it as the very root of their sinful merriment. Yet for all their power, these outright bans often failed. The people's attachment to their ancient rites was simply too strong, so the church shifted to a more cunning strategy, co-opting the tradition it could not destroy. It began to graft Christian meanings onto the pagan pole. The maypole was rebranded as a symbol of the cross or the tree of life from the Garden of Eden. Its celebration was moved to coincide with the purely Christian holiday of Pentecost, or linked to saints' days in early May. In some regions, a figure of the Virgin Mary was even placed at the top of the pole, transforming a pagan axis mundi into a pillar of the new faith. This created a fascinating cultural tug-of-war, a silent battle fought with ribbons and wreaths. The villagers continued their dances, outwardly accepting the new names and dates, but in their hearts, they were often still honoring the old spirits of the forest and field. The church, in its attempt to sanitize the symbol, had inadvertently ensured its survival, wrapping it in a thin Christian veil that barely contained the wild, ancient magic pulsing within. This vibrant celebration was fundamentally an act of sympathetic magic. Every element of the maypole ritual was meticulously designed to mimic, and therefore encourage the forces of creation and growth. The pole itself, a tall, straight trunk thrusting skyward from the earth, was a powerful representation of masculine vigor. Its placement in the village square, the community's heart, was a deliberate act meant to channel that fertile energy directly into the world around it. But this energy needed direction and form, which is where the dancers and their ribbons came in. The long, colorful strands represented the feminine, weaving principles of nature. As the dancers, often young men and women of marrying age, skipped and circled the pole, they wove these ribbons into a tight, intricate pattern down its length. This was not a random dance. It was a symbolic union, a cosmic marriage enacted before the entire village. The descending spiral of woven fabric visually tied the sky to the earth, binding the masculine energy of the pole with the receptive, life-nurturing power of the land. Can you see the profound intention behind this seemingly simple game? They were dancing the world into fruitfulness. The pattern they created was a physical spell for abundance, ensuring that the fields would be as full and tightly woven with grain as the pole was with ribbons. The vitality of the people was just as crucial as the fertility of the soil. The dance was a public display of the community's health and youth, a way of showcasing the very human energy required to build families and secure the future. In some regions, the festivities included the election of a May king and queen, who would reign over the day's events as living embodiments of the divine couple, their symbolic union guaranteeing the prosperity of all. This is why the church so often condemned the revelry as lewd. They recognized the potent, untamable life force being celebrated, a force that predated their doctrine and spoke to a much older truth about the interconnectedness of life, love, and the land. At the heart of this weaving dance stood two central figures, the May Queen and King, often chosen for their youth, vitality, and beauty. These were not merely honorary titles for a day of fun. They were living symbols, human vessels for the fertile spirit of spring itself. Their coronation was a profound community ritual, a moment where the village collectively anointed its own embodiment of hope and renewal. Imagine the most handsome young man and the fairest maiden, crowned not with gold, but with fresh blossoms and leaves, their simple regalia crafted from the very life they were meant to summon. For that single day, they were more than mere villagers. They became the divine couple, the Lord and Lady of the burgeoning green world. Their presence sanctified the entire celebration, turning the revelry into a potent rite. This was not just about honoring two individuals, but about reinforcing the social fabric that held the community together. The selection process itself was a powerful act, publicly recognizing the value of youth, health, and the potential for creating new families. It visually affirmed the hierarchy of the village, placing its most vibrant members at the center of the community's most important seasonal turning point. Their symbolic union mirrored the cosmic marriage of the maypole and the ribbons, a promise that the human community would also be fruitful and multiply. In a world where survival was precarious, the reign of the May Queen and King was a collective prayer made flesh, a belief that by honoring the forces of life in their most attractive human form, they could ensure those forces would bless their fields, their flocks, and their futures. With the May Queen and King presiding, the entire village gathered for the central act of the day, the weaving of the ribbons. Each dancer, often the community's young and unmarried members, would take hold of a long, colorful strand attached to the very top of the pole. They did not move randomly. Their dance was a precise, choreographed pattern, a slow and deliberate procession in opposite directions around the great wooden trunk. As they passed one another, over and under, the ribbons began to descend, slowly braiding themselves into a tight, beautiful sheath around the pole. This was the community's soul made visible. Every crossing of a red over a white, every green strand woven under a blue, represented the intertwining of individual lives. The strong farmer's son and the weaver's daughter, the wealthy family's heir and the poor shepherd's child, all were bound together in a single, vibrant pattern. Their collective movement created something far stronger and more beautiful than any single ribbon could be alone. The dance physically demonstrated that the village's strength did not lie in its individual members, but in the intricate, unbreakable web of their connections. Can you see how this was more than just a performance? It was a living map of their social bonds. A frayed or broken ribbon, or a dancer who stumbled and broke the rhythm, was seen as a bad omen, a sign of discord that could threaten the coming harvest. The perfect, tightly woven pattern at the end was a collective prayer for a community where no one would be left behind, where every family was supported by the whole. This was how they wove their hopes for harmony directly into the fabric of their world, ensuring that just as the ribbons held fast, so too would their shared lives. This powerful symbolism of unity, however, would face its ultimate test not from within, but from forces of change that would sweep across the countryside, threatening to unravel these ancient traditions forever. This dance of life was perfectly timed to the rhythm of the earth itself. The 1st of May, known as Beltane in the old Celtic world, was not just a date on the calendar, but a vital cross-quarter day. It sat precisely between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, marking the definitive end of the barren, uncertain season and the true beginning of summer's light. Imagine the immense relief of that moment. The long, cold winter, a time of dwindling stores and constant worry, was finally, irrevocably over. The celebrations were not a frivolous escape from work, but an essential part of the work itself. This was the day when the village's collective survival shifted from the storm to the open field. Cattle and sheep that had been huddled in cramped barns for months were now driven out to their summer pastures. This movement was perilous. The animals were weak from winter, and the spirits of the wild were thought to be particularly active. The great Beltane bonfires, lit on hilltops, were not just for warmth, but for purification. Driving livestock between these twin flames was believed to cleanse them of disease and protect them from harm for the coming season. The maypole stood as the village's own version of this sacred fire, a concentrated point of protective, fertile energy. Every ribbon woven around, it was a prayer for the growth of the crops that would soon be sprouting. The vitality of the dancers was a direct offering to ensure the vitality of the soil. This was why the festivities were so raucous and full of life, because the community was not just hoping for a good harvest, they were actively willing it into being through their collective joy and effort. Their survival for the next year literally depended on the success of the rituals performed on this single, crucial day. Yet woven into this intricate dance of community was a day of glorious chaos. On May Day, the rigid social ladder of the medieval village was not just ignored, it was deliberately turned upside down. This was the tradition of misrule, a sanctioned period where the normal order was suspended. For one day, the lowly could become lofty, and the powerful were expected to endure a dose of humility. A servant might boldly mock his master in a comedic play. A poor farmer could be crowned the lord of misrule and issue absurd but binding decrees, and young people might playfully tease their elders without fear of punishment. Imagine the sheer, liberating thrill of that reversal. This was not mere anarchy, it was a carefully engineered social pressure valve. The entire year was governed by strict hierarchies and unyielding labor, creating immense tensions that had no other outlet. May Day provided a safe, temporary release for those pent-up frustrations. By allowing the common folk to symbolically dethrone their leaders through laughter and satire, the community actually reinforced the very structures it was mocking. Once the sun set on the festivities and the ribbons were unwound, the servant returned to his duties and the master resumed his authority, but the shared experience of the inversion left everyone feeling heard and slightly more content with their lot. It was a brilliant piece of social engineering, a way to acknowledge inequality without letting it boil over into true rebellion. The laughter that echoed around the maypole was not just about joy, it was a vital medicine for the community's soul, healing the cracks before they could split the village apart. This ritualized rebellion revealed a profound truth, that a society's strength depends not just on order, but on its ability to periodically embrace a little well-timed chaos. This wild celebration was also a solemn act of defense. Just as the village gates were closed against human threats, the maypole served as a spiritual bulwark, a sacred boundary stone erected against invisible dangers. Medieval life was saturated with the fear of malevolent forces, from wandering spirits that could sour the milk to witches whose curses might blight the crops. The ritual of raising the pole was a powerful counterspell. By bringing the sacred world tree into their midst, the villagers were not just inviting blessings, they were actively driving evil back beyond their borders. The very act of selecting the perfect tree from the forest, hauling it with communal effort, and planting it firmly in the earth was a symbolic reclaiming of ordered space from the chaotic wild. Imagine the pole as a great, benevolent lightning rod, but instead of attracting electricity, it drew in protective energies and repelled all that was harmful. The ribbons themselves were not merely decorative. In many traditions, the specific colors held meaning, with red symbolizing life force and white representing purity, creating a vibrant, woven barrier that negative entities could not cross. The loud music, the rhythmic stomping of the dancers' feet, and the raucous laughter of the crowd were all believed to create a cacophony that frightened away spirits of misfortune. This created a sanctified circle of safety, with the maypole as its unwavering center. For one full year, until the next pole was raised, this central pillar was thought to maintain a protective aura over the entire community, its presence a constant reminder that their homes, their fields, and their families were watched over. The villagers danced not only for fertility, but for a more fundamental need, the profound security that comes from feeling your world is safe and whole. But this profound spiritual and social ritual also had a deeply practical foundation. For the medieval peasant bound by the rigid demands of the feudal system, May Day represented a rare and invaluable economic reset. This was one of the very few days in the entire year when the back-breaking cycle of labor was legally and customarily suspended. All those familiar obligations, the required days of work on the Lord's own land, the grinding toil in their own meager strips in the open fields, were set aside. Imagine the sheer physical and mental relief of that single, sanctioned pause. This was not laziness, it was a necessary investment in the community's most vital asset, its people. A workforce pushed to the brink of exhaustion by constant labor is ultimately a less productive one, more susceptible to illness, injury, and despair. The lords of the manor, perhaps unwittingly, understood this basic economic reality. By allowing a single day of complete release, they were not just permitting fun, they were ensuring the long-term stability of their entire agricultural operation. The festivities themselves, the dancing, the feasting, the laughter, were a form of collective maintenance. They repaired frayed nerves and restored strained relationships. The social ties woven around the maypole were as crucial to the village's economic health as the bonds between the oxen that pulled the plow. A community that celebrated together was a community that could cooperate during the brutal harvest, share resources in a lean year, and resolve disputes without fracturing. This single day of merriment was the glue that held the entire economic engine together, proving that the most valuable harvest of all was the strength and unity of the people themselves. That single village pole was a giant, but the great Maypole of London was a true titan. While country folk danced around their wooden anchors, the city of London raised a maypole so immense it became a landmark in its own right. This was no simple tree trunk dragged from the woods. Erected in the bustling Strand during the reign of the restored monarchy, this pole was a monumental feat of engineering, towering over 130 feet tall. It was so massive that when it was finally taken down decades later, it was used as roofing beams for a hall, a testament to its sheer size and strength. For over 50 years, it dominated the skyline, a permanent fixture of urban life far removed from its rural origins. So what did such a colossal pole represent in the heart of a growing metropolis? It was a bold declaration of civic pride and burgeoning merchant wealth. The powerful guilds and prosperous tradesmen who funded its erection were making a statement. Their maypole was not just a symbol of agricultural fertility, but of commercial and social vitality. It announced that London was not merely a collection of villages, but a world-class city, a center of commerce and culture that could command the resources to create spectacles on a staggering scale. Its continuous presence transformed the maypole from a fleeting seasonal ritual into a lasting monument to the city's own power and prestige. This urban giant also carried a potent, unspoken political message. It was raised shortly after the return of King Charles II to the throne, a period that saw the restoration of festivities and public merriment after the grim, restrictive rule of the Puritans. In this context, the Great Maypole was more than just a pole. It was a massive middle finger to the forces that had tried to ban such celebrations. Every dance held at its base, every ribbon woven around it, was a public rejection of Puritan austerity and a celebration of the monarchy's return. The pole stood as a silent but undeniable witness to the city's political allegiances, a symbol of the people's right to revelry and the triumph of old English traditions over a foreign, joyless ideology. Its story shows us that the humble maypole could be as much about power and politics as it was about petals and pollen. This cultural war over a simple pole reached its violent peak in the shadows of a London church. On a morning in the 1500s, a fiery Puritan preacher named Stephen Gosson stood before his congregation at St. Botolph's, his eyes fixed on the towering maypole in the neighboring Cornhill district. He did not see a symbol of community or spring. He saw a pagan idol, a profane stake driven into the heart of a Christian city, and a direct incitement to the very sins he preached against. His sermon was not a gentle critique, but a call to holy arms. He condemned the pole as a stinking, idolatrous May god, around which people danced not in innocent joy, but in a devilish imitation of proper worship. The words from his pulpit were sparks on dry tinder. Soon after, a band of his most zealous followers, armed with axes and righteous fury, stormed into the square. The sound of their blades biting into the wood was a declaration of war. This was not just the felling of a tree, it was an attempt to cut down the old, merry soul of England itself. The Cornhill Maypole, a beloved landmark that had stood for generations, crashed to the ground. Its fall sent a shockwave through the nation, a physical manifestation of the deep cultural rift tearing the country apart. For the Puritans, this was a victory for godliness. For the common people, it was a profound and painful loss, the destruction of a centuries-old anchor of their communal life. The battle lines were now drawn in the very sawdust left behind. The triumphant return of King Charles II to the throne in 1660 was not just a political restoration, it was a cultural resurrection. After 2 decades of Puritan rule that had stripped public life of its color and music, the nation was desperate for joy. The new king, known as the Merry Monarch, understood this deep-seated longing perfectly. His reign was inaugurated with a spectacular act of defiance against the grim austerity of the past, the raising of an enormous new maypole in the Strand. This was not merely a pole, it was a proclamation carved from a single, magnificent tree. Towering over 130 feet, it was a physical declaration that merry old England was back. Can you feel the symbolic power of that moment? For years, the sound of axes felling maypoles had echoed the suppression of popular tradition. Now, the sight of this colossal pillar being hoisted into the London sky was a direct rebuttal to every Puritan sermon that had condemned such revelry as sin. The celebrations that erupted around its base were more than just a party. They were a mass act of reclaiming a stolen heritage. The people were not just dancing for spring, they were dancing for their very right to celebrate, to gather, and to find joy in their ancient customs. This great pole became the ultimate symbol of the Restoration spirit, a permanent fixture in the city that stood for 50 years as a daily reminder that the power of popular tradition could, and did, triumph over enforced solemnity. Yet the story of the maypole does not belong to England alone. Across the Channel, in the dense forests and rolling farmlands of Germany, the tradition took on a wonderfully competitive edge. Here, the maybaum or may tree was not just raised, it was fiercely guarded. A village's pride was measured by the height and grandeur of its decorated pole, but the real drama began under the cover of night. Rival villages would plot elaborate heists, attempting to steal their neighbor's maybaum before the 1st of May. If successful, the humiliated village had to ransom their prized pole back with copious amounts of beer and food, turning an act of thievery into a raucous, community-binding feast. Imagine the tension and thrill of those moonlit missions, the whispered plans, and the triumphant cheers of a successful capture. This was more than a prank, it was a ritualized conflict that strengthened regional bonds through a shared game of cunning and camaraderie. Far to the north, in Sweden, the celebration centered on the Majstang. While it shared the familiar form of a crossbar with hanging rings, the focus was less on weaving ribbons and more on a spirited dance for fertility. Young people would leap high, trying to capture the rings, their athletic jumps symbolizing a direct reach for the vitality of the coming season. In some parts of France, the pole was not a single trunk but a sapling, stripped and decorated, then planted firmly in the ground as a living symbol of renewal. Each region, from the Italian Alps to the Spanish plains, adapted the core symbolism to its own landscape and needs. The universal idea of a world axis and a bringer of fertility remained, but its expression was beautifully local. A coastal village might weave nets into its decorations, while a mountain community used edelweiss and alpine flowers. This incredible diversity reveals a profound truth. The maypole was not a rigid doctrine imposed from above, but a living, breathing tradition that grew from the soil of each unique place, proving that the human need to mark the turning of the year and to connect with cosmic forces is as varied and vibrant as the cultures themselves. The perfect maypole began not with an axe, but with a quest. Months before the 1st of May, the village would send its most experienced woodsmen into the sacred groves and managed forests, searching for a single, flawless specimen. This was not a task for any common tree. They sought a young birch for its symbolic purity and graceful bark, or a tall, straight pine, prized for its strength and resilience. The ideal candidate had to be perfectly straight, towering, and free of any major blemishes, a living pillar worthy of becoming the village axis mundi for the coming year. The selection itself was a ritual, an act of reverence for the spirit of the forest. The woodsmen would often make a small offering at the base of the chosen tree, acknowledging the life they were about to take for the good of the community. Then, with coordinated swings of their axes, they would bring the giant down, its fall echoing through the quiet woods like a drumbeat announcing the coming celebration. Hauling this massive trunk from the forest was a monumental task that required the strength of every able-bodied man in the village. Using ropes, rollers, and sheer muscle, they would drag their prize across fields and down muddy lanes, a slow, grunting procession of shared labor. This was far more than just moving wood. It was a powerful demonstration of collective purpose. The ox that strained in its harness was as vital as the blacksmith heaving on a rope, and the farmer's strong back was equal to the carpenter's guiding hand. There were no bystanders in this effort, only participants. Once the pole reached the village square, the real challenge began, raising it. This was a delicate and dangerous operation. A deep hole would have been dug in the center of the green, and using a system of forked poles, ropes, and human leverage, the villagers would slowly, inch by inch, walk the colossal trunk upright. A single misstep could mean injury or a shattered pole, so every command and every heave had to be perfectly synchronized. The final thud, as the base settled into the earth, was met with a collective cheer of relief and triumph, the community spirit now physically anchored in their midst. Only then did the artistry begin. The entire village, including the women and children, would descend upon the newly erected pole. They adorned it with the very essence of the awakening world, long, flowing ribbons in colors of life giving red, pure white, and vibrant green. They wove garlands of freshly picked wildflowers, hawthorn blossoms, and buttercups, their sweet scent filling the air. In some traditions, a large circular wreath, symbolizing the cyclical nature of the seasons, was fixed to the very top. This decoration was not a haphazard affair, but a careful, joyful act of consecration. Each tied ribbon, each carefully placed flower, was a personal contribution to the village's shared prayer for the year ahead. The rough, masculine wood of the pole was now clothed in the soft, feminine beauty of the land, a perfect visual representation of the sacred union the community hoped to enact. By the time the sun set, the functional tree trunk had been utterly transformed into a dazzling village totem, a collective masterpiece born from shared sweat and shared hope, standing ready for the dance of life to begin. Every ribbon and blossom was a silent prayer woven into wood. The villagers did not decorate their maypole at random. They were creating a complex tapestry of symbols, each chosen with intention and ancient knowledge. The flowers woven into garlands were far more than just pretty decorations. They were a living pharmacy and a book of spells for the community's well-being. Hawthorn blossoms, with their sharp, protective thorns and sweet-smelling flowers, were believed to ward off witches and evil spirits. The vibrant yellow buttercup symbolized wealth and prosperity, a direct plea for a rich harvest. Delicate white daisies represented innocence and new beginnings, while sturdy bluebells were thought to call in the benevolent fairies of the woodland. Even the seemingly simple greenery held power. Ivy, with its tenacious grip, stood for fidelity and strong marriage bonds. The entire garland was a collective charm for health and protection, its sweet scent a fragrant barrier against misfortune. Can you see how every stem was a word in their shared language of hope? The ribbons themselves told their own colorful story, while the specific meanings could vary from village to village. Common threads of symbolism connected them all. A deep, vibrant red almost universally symbolized life, passion, and the vital force of the sun needed to ripen the crops. Pure white stood for light, purity, and the cleansing of the old year's troubles. Lush green was the color of the earth itself, a direct invocation for fertile fields and healthy, growing plants. In some coastal communities, you might find blue ribbons, representing the water needed for life and safe passage for fishermen. Together, these strands did not just create a beautiful pattern, they wove the very elements of a successful life into a single, powerful emblem. The descending spiral of red, white, and green was a visual incantation, binding the sun's fire, the cleansing light, and the earth's fertility directly to the world axis at the village heart. This was magic made visible, a brilliant fusion of art, faith, and a deep, practical understanding of the natural world upon which their lives depended. This vibrant dance was the year's most important social event for the young and unmarried. While the entire village celebrated, the Maypoles' true magic often unfolded for the boys and girls on the cusp of adulthood. In a society where daily life was strictly segregated by gender and supervised by elders, the 1st of May offered a precious, sanctioned space for interaction. The intricate weaving dance was not just a metaphor for cosmic union. It was a very real, carefully choreographed opportunity for flirtation and connection. As young men and women passed each other, over and under the colorful ribbons, their eyes could meet, their hands could briefly touch, and shy smiles could be exchanged, all under the approving gaze of the community. Can you sense the thrilling significance of those moments? For a young woman who spent her days in domestic toil and a young man laboring in distant fields, this was a rare chance to see and be seen, to assess potential partners not as names or reputations, but as living, breathing individuals full of life and energy. The dance itself served as a test of character, revealing who was graceful, who was strong, who could keep rhythm, and who possessed the patience and coordination essential for a successful partnership. A young man who fumbled his ribbon or a maiden who lost the step was not just spoiling the pattern, they were dimming their own prospects in the eyes of their peers and families. This was courtship as a public performance, with the future of the community literally hanging in the balance, woven into every crossing strand. The laughter and music provided a perfect cover for whispered conversations and stolen glances, turning the pole into the heart of the village social and romantic life. The selection of the May Queen and King further elevated this theme, placing an idealized version of youthful romance at the very center of the festivities. Their symbolic reign was a blessing upon all such unions, a community-wide endorsement of love and marriage as the foundation for continued survival. The games that followed the dance, like chasing through the woods to gather blossoms or the playful capture of a May King by his queen, were all extensions of this courtship ritual. They were designed to push young people together, to encourage the natural attractions that would lead to new families, new homes, and new hands to work the land. In this way, the maypole was not merely celebrating the fertility of the earth. It was actively cultivating the fertility of the people themselves, ensuring that the community would not just survive, but truly thrive for generations to come. That vibrant tapestry of village life, woven so tightly around the maypole, could not withstand the relentless march of the industrial age. As the 19th century dawned, the old agricultural rhythms that governed rural existence began to fracture. Enclosure acts fenced off the common lands where villagers had once gathered, and the magnetic pull of factory work in growing cities drew young people away from their ancestral homes. The very foundation of the community, the shared labor and the collective dependence on the land, was crumbling. The maypole, once the pulsating heart of a village's spiritual and social world, began to seem like a quaint relic from pagan era. Its deep magic was fading, no longer seen as essential for survival in a world increasingly dominated by steam engines and weekly wages. The profound belief that a dancing community could directly influence the fertility of the soil was replaced by a new faith in scientific agriculture and commercial fertilizer. The great protective spirit of the pole was no match for the soot and sprawl of urban expansion, yet the tradition was far too deeply rooted in the cultural memory to vanish entirely. Instead, it underwent a remarkable metamorphosis, finding a new, if diminished, life in a most unexpected place, the schoolyard. Victorian educators and folklorists, witnessing the rapid disappearance of old customs, made a conscious effort to preserve them. They saw the maypole not as a sacred axis mundi, but as a charming piece of national heritage, a wholesome pastime suitable for children. The powerful, often raucous, fertility rites of the village green were carefully scrubbed away, leaving behind the colorful ribbons and the simple skipping dance. The complex symbolism of cosmic union and earthly desire was replaced with lessons in coordination and teamwork. What was the profound cost of this sanitization? The maypole lost its soul. It was no longer a ritual where the community's fate for the coming year was believed to hang in the balance, but a cheerful performance for proud parents on a spring afternoon. The vital connection to the turning of the seasons, to the desperate hope for a good harvest, and to the raw, untamable forces of nature was severed. The deep, communal effort of selecting the tree, hauling it, and raising it was replaced by a metal pole stored in a school gymnasium, yet something precious was undeniably preserved. The basic form survived, the beautiful pattern of the weave endured, and the simple, innocent joy of the dance was passed on to new generations. In this transition, the maypole became a museum piece, a beautiful fossil of a world we have lost, its wild, ancient heart still faintly beating beneath the tidy surface of a children's game. The rustic power of the village maypole was captured and transformed by the artist's brush and the poet's pen. William Shakespeare himself wove the maypole into the fabric of his comedies, using it as a direct symbol of untamed, joyful celebration standing in opposition to puritanical gloom. In a telling stage direction from his play, the character of Falstaff is humorously described as a man so large, he makes the real maypole in the Strand look like a tiny rod. This was more than a simple joke, it was a cultural affirmation. Shakespeare placed the maypole squarely within the world of forest revels and mischievous fairies, aligning it with the natural, chaotic forces that his audiences understood and loved. By the Victorian era, this artistic reinterpretation reached its peak. Painters like John Collier created lush, sentimental scenes of May Day, depicting rosy-cheeked milkmaids and handsome farmers dancing around a flower-bedecked pole in an eternally sunny, peaceful countryside. These canvases were wildly popular, but they presented a carefully edited version of the past. The raw, desperate energy of the fertility rite was gone, replaced by a vision of harmless, picturesque merriment. Can you see the profound shift happening here? These artists were not documenting a living tradition, they were inventing a national fantasy. They smoothed away the rough edges of genuine folk belief, the fear of famine, the ritualized social rebellion, and the potent sexual symbolism, leaving behind only a beautiful, sanitized tableau. This romanticized vision served a specific purpose for a nation undergoing rapid industrialization. For the new urban middle class, these paintings and poems offered an escape, an imagined refuge in a pre-industrial idyll they called Merry England. This mythical past was a land of perpetual spring, social harmony, and innocent fun, a stark contrast to the grimy, chaotic reality of the factory town. The term Merry England itself became a powerful cultural brand, and the maypole was its perfect logo, a symbol of a simpler, happier time that probably never existed in the form they depicted. Our entire modern perception of the medieval village fair, with its carefree dancers and benevolent lords, is largely a Victorian construction filtered through this nostalgic lens. We inherited their dream of the past, often mistaking it for historical reality. The true, complex power of the maypole, with its cosmic stakes and communal urgency, was gently buried under layers of pretty flowers and wistful sentiment, transforming a sacred engine of survival into a charming decoration for the walls of a London townhouse. Beneath the flowers and laughter, the maypole served as a powerful psychological anchor. In a world ruled by the unpredictable forces of weather, disease, and crop failure, the future was a constant source of low-grade dread. This single, joyous celebration was the community's collective answer to that deep-seated anxiety. By coming together to perform the same rituals their ancestors had, they were creating a profound sense of certainty in an uncertain world. The dance was a way to assert control, not over the weather itself, but over their own emotional response to it. They could not command the rains to come, but they could, through this shared action, reaffirm their solidarity and their capacity to face whatever the year might bring. Can you feel the immense psychological relief in that? The maypole ritual transformed abstract fears into manageable, physical actions. The fear of famine became a ribbon to be woven. The anxiety over social discord became a step in the dance that had to be perfectly synchronized. This was the collective management of hope. The celebration also forged an unbreakable sense of belonging. For people whose identities were entirely tied to their village, participating in this annual rite was a powerful reaffirmation of their place in the world. The young man who strained to raise the pole and the young woman who tied her ribbon were not just individuals. They were vital threads in a living social fabric. This shared experience created what sociologists would later call social cohesion. It reinforced norms, rewarded cooperation, and made everyone feel seen and valued for their contribution, no matter how small. In a precarious agrarian society where isolation could mean death, the maypole was a towering, physical promise that no one would face the coming winter alone. It was a monument to mutual dependence, a brilliant piece of social technology that used joy as its primary tool. The celebration was not an escape from their harsh reality, but a vital mechanism for building the resilience needed to endure it. So where do we find the ghost of these wooden giants? The physical evidence for medieval maypoles is as ephemeral as the morning mist on a May Day meadow. Wood rots, and a pole that stood for a single season would leave almost no trace in the archaeological record. We will never uncover a perfectly preserved maypole from the 1400s. Instead, historians and folklorists become detectives, piecing together a compelling case from three tantalizing lines of evidence. The first and most telling comes from the very institution that sought to destroy them, the church. Parish records and the fiery sermons of bishops are filled with condemnations of these pagan pillars. These angry pronouncements are, ironically, our best proof of how widespread and stubbornly popular the tradition was. Why would a priest waste his breath denouncing something that did not exist? Each sermon against the profane pole in the green is a backhanded confirmation of its powerful presence in village life. The second line of evidence appears in the quiet margins of history, in illuminated manuscripts and early woodcuts. Here, we catch fleeting glimpses of the celebrations. A detailed scene in a book of hours might show peasants dancing around a striped pole, their simple figures captured in ink and gold leaf. These illustrations are precious because they show us the event as contemporaries saw it, not as later romantic artists imagined it. They give us the costumes, the posture of the dancers, and the basic form of the pole itself. The third clue is written directly onto the landscape itself, hidden in plain sight within our maps. Across England, you can find place names like Pole Green, Maypole Farm, or the Dancers Inn. These are not random labels. They are folk memories fossilized into geography, each one marking a spot where a community once raised its sacred tree year after year. A meadow called Pole Green was almost certainly the traditional village site for the celebration. These names are the echoes of laughter and music that have long since faded from the air. Together, this patchwork of proof paints an undeniable picture. The maypole was not a marginal curiosity, but a central, vibrant, and deeply contentious thread in the fabric of medieval life, a tradition so potent its shadow remains cast across our records and our very land. The maypole stands accused of crimes it never committed. Popular fiction often drapes this village symbol in a cloak of dark, sensational secrets, suggesting it was a site for brutal human sacrifice or that its ribbons were once stained with blood. These grim tales, however, say more about our modern fascination with the macabre than they do about historical reality. Scholarly research into medieval records and folk customs reveals no evidence to support these lurid claims. The true power of the maypole was not in death, but in life. Its rituals were focused on fostering creation and growth, not on violent endings. The sacrifice involved was symbolic, the offering of a tree from the forest to become the sacred center of the community, not the taking of a human life. Another common misconception paints the maypole's symbolism with a single, simplistic brush, reducing it to nothing more than a giant phallus. While its form certainly carried connotations of masculine energy and vitality, this is a reductive view that ignores the beautiful complexity of the rite. The ceremony was about balance. The tall, upright pole represented the masculine, but it was the weaving, circular dance of the ribbons that embodied the feminine, encompassing principle. The magic was believed to happen in the union of the two, the binding of sky to earth, of masculine force to feminine form. To see only one half of this sacred equation is to miss the entire point. The villagers were not worshipping a single concept, they were orchestrating a cosmic marriage. They understood that life required both elements in harmony. So the next time you see an image of a maypole, look past the dark myths and the overly simplistic interpretations. See it for what it truly was, a sophisticated, heartfelt plea for balance, for unity, and for the flourishing of all life, from the smallest seed in the field to the newest child in the cradle. That single wooden pole was, in truth, the beating heart of the medieval village. It was a profound symbol of fertility, a desperate and joyous plea for the land, the livestock, and the people to be fruitful. It was the ultimate tool for community cohesion, a ritual that physically wove individual lives into a single, unbreakable social fabric through shared labor and synchronized dance. It stood as a stubborn relic of ancient pagan belief, a world tree connecting earth to the heavens, which the church could never fully erase, only disguise. And above all, it was a sanctioned holiday, a necessary explosion of festive release from the grinding toil of feudal life, a day where the social order was playfully overturned and hope was collectively renewed. When we look past the flowers and ribbons, we see our ancestors trying to make sense of their world. They did not have our science, but they possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of the cycles of nature and the human spirit. They knew that survival required more than just planting seeds. It demanded planting joy, reinforcing bonds, and believing in the magic of a new beginning. This tradition connects us to a time when humanity saw itself as part of a living, breathing cosmos, where a dance could influence the harvest and a decorated tree could hold a village's fate. What spring traditions exist in your own community, perhaps hidden in plain sight, that echo this ancient need for celebration and renewal? Share your stories in the comments below.